Now, a couple weeks ago, I found an old video on YouTube. Sometimes you're just scrolling on YouTube and you found something. And I found someone talking to the Kennedy Institute of Politics at Harvard about 5 days before the 1996 elections. That was none other than Dr. Ralph Reed. And it's my honor to introduce him tonight. And at that event, he faced a hostile audience. And some of the questions and fire that he was taking are the same issues that we're fighting today. He has been a leader in the conservative movement for decades. It's my honor to learn from him. It's my honor to look up to him. And it's my honor to work for him. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ralph Reed, the founder and chairman of the Georgia Faith and Freedom Coalition.
Thank you, Mac. Let's give Mac and the board of Georgia Faith and Freedom Coalition a round of applause for this incredible evening. What a crowd, what a lineup. I heard a rumor backstage that a presidential candidate will be arriving shortly, so I'll try to take as long as I possibly can. I want you to reflect, if you think for one moment that what we do here doesn't matter, I want you to take just a minute on this day to pause and reflect back 22 years to a cool, crisp, clear day under a beautiful blue sky and brilliant sunlight. Hardly a cloud in the sky. When 12 radical Islamic terrorist hijackers, funded, trained, and placed here by Al-Qaeda, hijacked 4 airplanes and flew 2 of them into the North and South Tower of the World Trade Center, the very heart of the financial system of the most powerful economy, the richest economy the world has ever seen. In an instant, 100,000 jobs disappeared in Lower Manhattan. It was like a dagger aimed at the heart of our economy. It was deliberate, it was purposeful. They flew another plane into the Pentagon. Barbara Olson, a prominent conservative leader, thought leader, commentator, was on the plane that was being flown into the Pentagon. She was texting her husband, who worked in the Bush Justice Department, and had an opportunity to say goodbye to him before she perished in the flames and carnage at the Pentagon. And the 4th plane, because of the bravery and the courage of the passengers on that plane, went down in a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. A plane that we believe was headed for the U.S. Capitol. And if you don't think what we do makes a difference, think about the fact that on that day, the man who was at the moment those attacks took place was reading to a group of school children in Sarasota, Florida, was elected not only President of the United States, not only the Commander-in-Chief of our armed forces, but the leader of the free world, was in that office because of 537 votes out of 105 million votes cast. We came that close in a case that went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court to having Al Gore and not George W. Bush leading our nation in the worst attack on U.S. soil, at least in terms of civilian casualties, in the history of our country. And we immediately, in a bipartisan, unified way, went into Afghanistan, We began the process of killing, dismantling, and degrading al-Qaeda. We removed the Taliban, which harbored them and refused to give them up. And then we removed Saddam Hussein, one of the bloodiest and most dangerous and violent dictators, not only in the Middle East, but in the entire world. Because of leadership. Leadership that was elected by a few hundred votes. What we do really matters. Because as President Bush told me one time, and I never forgot this, at the height of the war on terror, he said, "Ralph, if there is any problem anywhere in the world, it ends up on my desk." You know, this stuff doesn't get solved by the EU. It doesn't get solved by the United Nations. The United States is the leader in the world. And if you don't believe me, just think about what happened 20 years later, almost to the day. 5:50 p.m. local time in Kabul on August 26, 2021, as people are literally trying to break through barriers and crawl on their hands and knees and run across a tarmac to grab a hold of a wheel or fuselage or the landing gear of a U.S. transport plane so that they can get the heck out of Afghanistan. And at that moment, a suicide bomber detonated their bomb and killed 13 American servicemen and women. And they did so after Joe Biden ignored all of his military advisors, including the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who warned what would happen if we unilaterally withdrew from Afghanistan without leaving a residual protective force to at least protect the airports and to protect Americans. And I believe, as the son of a career Naval Reserve officer and the son-in-law of a career Army officer who served 2 tours of duty as a combat helicopter pilot in Vietnam, that on that moment, Joe Biden disqualified himself from holding the office of President of the United States. And I don't know how many of you saw Mark Thiessen's op-ed in the Washington Post. I think it was last week. It's been within the last 10 days. He pointed out that from that moment, when Kabul fell, and by the way, the Taliban now runs Afghanistan again, there are leading al-Qaeda terrorists that are in Kabul right now, living in the lap of luxury under the Taliban. And you mark my words, we will have to deal with them again because of this disgraceful performance and lack of leadership. And from that moment on, Mark Thiessen pointed out in this op-ed, until today, Joe Biden has never had a job approval rating that broke 50%. His job approval has been net negative ever since, and it has never moved. Not just because of inflation, although we've had the worst inflation in 40 years. Not just because of the humanitarian crisis on the southern border, although by the time we go to the polls next November, between 6 and 8 million illegal aliens will have crossed our border. And there is no telling how many of them are violent or are getting across the border from China or the Middle East with nefarious objectives against our country. We may never know until it's too late. Not just because of those things, not just because we have a land war in Europe for the first time in 80 years with no apparent plan to either win or end it. And not just because the president, and I want to be polite here, doesn't always appear at his sharpest. How many of you saw him put the Medal of Honor around the Vietnam Army helicopter pilot the other day at the White House and then just wandered off. And everybody in the East Room was in a state of shock. They were applauding. The Medal of Honor winner was standing there at attention, and Biden just wandered out of the room. His job approval is 42% in the Wall Street Journal poll. It's 39% in the CNN poll. Folks, if CNN says he's at 39%, it's lower. It's lower. Let me give you one more poll number. And these are liberal media organizations. This isn't our poll. The Washington Post did a poll in May. And they asked a simple question: who had the strongest record of accomplishment as president? Joe Biden or Donald Trump? Joe Biden, 40%, Donald Trump, 52%. Now, if the Washington Post and ABC News and CNN are admitting this, I mean, the New York Times went out and did a poll, and they showed the presidential race tied today. If they show it tied, we're going to win. And the only thing we got to do is our job. Now, in 2022, Faith and Freedom Coalition's volunteers, staff, and organizers knocked on 8,584,949 doors. Not that we're counting. And in 2024, that number is going to go to 10 million. 10 million doors knocked in 21 states. Every battleground congressional district, every battleground Senate state, every battleground presidential race. That means we will, the industry standard is 1.7 to 1.8 registered voters per household on our side of the ball. On their side, it's about 1.1, because more of our people are married, more of our people have children. That means we're going to reach between 17 and 18 million voters at the door. And let me tell you how we do this. We don't just knock on it once and walk away. We track these voters every night. I don't want to frighten any of you, but we know whether you vote and we know when you vote. So after we knock on the doors now in battleground precincts, we track it. And if you haven't voted within 5 days, we go back to the door again. And we tell them, you haven't voted yet, have you? Another 5 days, if they still haven't voted, we go back to the door. We're going to go back over and over and over again until they vote, and we have the outcome that will restore this nation to greatness. We're doing one other thing in 2024 that is going to be huge. We're going to be doing voter registration and discipleship classes in between 500 and 1,000 Bible-believing churches in each of the key battleground states. You know what they are. Georgia is ground zero, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada, those at a minimum. And we will register an average of 50 to 100 new voters, we estimate, in each of those churches. That means we're going to add an average of 50 to 100,000 new Christian voters in every single battleground state before we go to the polls. And I want to make you a promise. If you will help us, and if we execute this, you're going to see on election night 2024, standing in this ballroom or a ballroom like it, or in your home watching on television, you're going to see so many long faces on television sets in New York and in Washington, D.C., as they have to announce one of the most shocking outcomes in our lifetime. And you remember 2016, you remember that night. We're going to have one like that again. And we're not only going to have a night like that again, we're going to do something even more important. We're going to restore this nation to the godly principles and biblical values upon which she was founded and restore to moral greatness. Thank you all very much, and God bless you.